What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have yet another album review, and one that I definitely want to go over, even though I feel like I've talked about a lot of albums that sound very similar. So we are going to go over the latest offering from Xorsist at the Somber Steps to Serenity. This comes out also on the 6th of October on Prosthetic Records. This band formed in 2020 in Stockholm, Sweden. This is their second album overall. I actually got their debut album, Death Possession, in a Metalhead box a while ago. And when I listened to it, this is straight up HM2 Swedish death metal, and done in such a classic style that, oh my god, you could barely tell the difference between this and, say, I don't know, Dismembered, Entombed, Grave. It sounds like that. Even Carnage. We'll throw in Carnage too. Why not?
Yeah.
It sounds like all of those bands, and namely like their earliest offerings, or at least in Carnage's case, their only offering. This is a three-piece band, and none of them can drink here in the U.S. They are all underage. I believe two of the members are 20, and the main guy in this band, I believe his name is Gustav. He is 18 years old, and yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's it's depressing, first of all, but also good on him for being that young and being that talented, because when we say things like, it sounds like, I don't know, Dismember or Entombed, good on you guys for being able to pull that off. That's a huge compliment. We were talking about this earlier. At 18 years old, we didn't have the internet, so we were fighting to find music. I mean, you had to go word of mouth, you had to go magazines, you had to go, based on an album cover or labels at the time. I know I've said it before, but I used to pick up Roadrunner Records because it was on Roadrunner.
Same. I mean, the advantages of having just endless music at your fingertips, and the fact that he is listening to it and found a sound that he absolutely loves and is able to play it. Bravo, kid.
And furthermore, I want to point out, when you said they formed in 2020, that was 3 years ago. He was only 15. At 15, I was a gigantic loser.
Well, I mean, don't sell yourself short. You're still kind of a gigantic loser.
I can sell myself short. I was shorter then.
Oh yeah, good point. Now, this is so steeped in that early Stockholm Swedish death metal sound that they even got Thomas Skogsberg and went to Sunlight Studios to get this done. And honestly, the sound of this album, it sounds like it came out in 1990. Like someone put this in a time capsule and some person in Stockholm just unearthed it. It's like, oh, what's this? It's like a demo from 1990 from probably a Stockholm death metal band.
Now, it's possible that they found, a flux capacitor, because if this came out in 1990, these guys weren't even born yet.
And they went to Thomas on the first album, too. So I was not surprised when I saw his name pop up again. But, as soon as I was getting ready to jam this, like, all right, let's go. But first, we had to sit through his piano recital, probably from high school. The opening track, A Life in Vain, is honestly a really pretty piano sonnet. And it sounds very natural. Like there's a little bit of ambience in the background, but it just sounds like someone just sitting there playing the piano, like no additional effects, no weird sound effects to make it sound futuristic, because this is supposed to sound like it came out in 1990. Fuck futuristic. It's kind of classical. And while it's really pretty and not necessarily indicative of most of this album, I think it's kind of a cool setup, because once you get into Carve It Out, man, we are off to the races. And man, HM2, snarling. This is like the dirtiest guitar tone I think I have heard on an HM2 release that has come out within maybe the last few years. HM2 death metal is all over the place, and there's a lot of different styles of it. Some embrace the more crust side, some of it's more thrashy, some of it is, more brutal or more modern sounding, like Bloodbath. This sounds just gross. These guitars were resting in festering slime since 1990, and then they just pulled them out and didn't bother cleaning them off and just played. And I'm almost sure that pedal is worn the fuck out, because it is the most sizzly, gross sound.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like they took that knob and just turned it all the way up and just said, okay, we're gonna go for it. It is seriously gross. It sounds like everything's covered in slime and filth and like obviously something you'd want from an HM2 band, but man, it's like really overdone.
And that also counts with the bass too. The bass absolutely snarls on here, and this being a 3-piece, it's kind of cool because there aren't like too many doubled guitars. In fact, I heard a lot of like single track stuff on here. Unless, you had like a lead come in, then obviously they're doubled, but the bass really stands out. It's got a huge, just disgusting low end. It also snarls. The drums sound very raw, and the drummer is just beating the dog shit out of them.
Yeah, I mean, think of thrash bands at this point, just beating the piss out of the drums, because a lot of it is really just like D beats. It's very straightforward. It's solid, like he's definitely a solid drummer, but there's not a whole lot going on in this area. It just sounds very natural to the point of like, this is what it's going to sound like live.
And I'll say, after jamming this and their debut, I really do want to see this band live, because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of like youthful, pissed off teenager energy, mainly because one of the members is still a teenager. So pissed off teenager music made by pissed off teenagers, or at least one. That's kind of cool. But going through this album, man, there's a fierce echo of familiarity. So picking it apart in terms of what I think might be different, there isn't much. Like in terms of more like modern bands, or at least newer bands, I would say like Otratum might be probably the closest thing, but their sound is also very old school as well. And this just checks off like everything you need for Stockholm death metal. Like, I'm reasonably sure there might have been a checklist in the studio, which the first 2 checks were probably Thomas Skogsberg, check, Sunlight Studios, check.
And the third one being HM2 pedal, check.
And then D-beats, like Imitation, which, I'll be honest, it sounds like it could be like a Dismembered B-side. Like, we sat back and jammed a little bit of Like an Ever-Flowing Stream, just because, like, man,
right,
some of these riffs sound really, really on the nose for that album. And this album, with its ferocious D-beats, nasty tremolo riffs, and just bottom-heavy, disgusting chugging, that rawness, that sort of filth that comes out of it, it's really close.
Like, very close. If you would have played any song on this record and told me it was a B-side from either Entombed or Dismember, I would have said yes.
I might have said the vocals sound a little bit different, and
yes,
then you could have said, oh no, they were trying, it was a B-side. They were doing something different. Like, oh, okay, no, that totally makes sense. I believe you now. And much like those classic albums, there's sort of like a punk looseness to this. Like, not everything is like pinpoint precise. There's, some stuff that is like just slightly off, but like not sloppy in a bad way, like human. Like, it's just the energy got hold of them, and they wanted to play as loud and as fast as possible. Like the broken up blast beat that starts off Blessed by the Divine. There's this kind of this like sort of punk sort of vibe to it. You feel like you're going to go into like a grindcore song. Like, honestly, the drum work reminded me a lot of Repulsion. Like, it's just aggressive, and like there's not a lot of nuance to it, at least at the start of it. It's just going. And probably the most modern touch on here is, arguably I would say there are more like straight up blast beats on here than there are on, again, the classic albums that they definitely listen to, definitely own, definitely have patches on their jackets for, all that stuff.
Yeah, like they did their homework. It wasn't like a young band fucking around. Like, they were transparent in their imitation and worship of these bands, and they did it quite well. I mean, from a production standpoint, you got the guy. You got the guy to do it. He's touched masterpieces, so, and you did it in the correct studio. Like, if you really wanted to make this sound like what you're after, you did it.
Yeah, like nothing about this album sounds modern at all. All this sounds like classic, like not dated, because, well, I mean, that's kind of a, subjective matter there, but I think it sounds absolutely great just in terms of going for that classic sound. And I think they got exactly what they wanted to. They wanted this thing to sound raw, gritty, and just sort of like dirty, almost like a more polished demo. Coterie of the Depraved, that's definitely a more blasty, frantic song. Again, the riffs are kind of all over the place, but you have like some elements of groove in there that I think are employed differently. Like, there's a section there that feels like it's going into a breakdown. The riff starts slowing down. You get these single, slow, kind of droning chugs. And when they isolate that guitar, again, it is like the gnarliest sounding thing. But instead of like going into like kind of a groovy breakdown, they blast underneath it and do the slow riff on top while they do like a really just squealy, dirty fucking lead. And that's maybe like slightly more modern, like not by much, but I mean, in terms of like the predictability of these tracks, again, I kind of feel like I've listened to them in one form or another years ago, but there's a lot of fun to the songwriting. Like, you can definitely tell they have a passion for this, and at some points it gets a little close, like a little too close to the source. Like Distorted Shapes, another absolute banger on this album. It's filthy, it's fast, it's kind of punky and thrashy and feral, and the tremolo riff is a little familiar, maybe off by a few notes, but it sounds like Override the Overture opening track on like an overflowing stream. And that wasn't the only time that happened.
And don't get me wrong, even though these songs sound very akin to their influences, there are still some cool parts to them. I mean, all the leads have these great, like, dive bomb kind of just shreddy moments. And then there's a ton of breakdowns, like in Carve It Out or in Distorted Shapes, where it does open with that gross little groove to it. But I think something that is set apart from all of the worship on here is the song At the Somber Steps to Serenity, the title track, where it starts off dark and doomy, sludgy. It's like Crowbar, but with HM2.
You get a nice, cool lead-in track to Darkened Wings, which, I mean, it's an interlude, and generally I bitch about those, but the interludes in here I think are really well done because they're musical and they're isolated instruments. And Darkened Wings is just an acoustic guitar and playing a very cool, like, classical piece. Once again, showcasing that this kid is super talented on guitar and so damn young. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyway, that really works well with the title track. It kind of leads it in.
Yeah.
The song gets nice and heavy. It's dark and sinister, and it kind of goes back to the acoustic melodies in it. This is the longest song on the album. It's like 8 minutes and 24 seconds, and it's the most dynamic. And honestly, probably the one that sounds maybe the most like them and their influences kind of combined, because this has a totally different vibe in terms of like just the songwriting dynamics.
Maybe in this case, maybe it's like a precursor to what's to come next, because it is the only song that sounds not like all the others.
Yeah, I mean, this album really sticks to its guns. It's fast, it's furious, it is raw and gritty, and I mean, it's emulating albums that I absolutely love. Like, you know, everyone knows I'm an HM2 slut, and if you don't, now you do.
Right. I mean, you should. Anybody that watches this channel at this point should know that both of us are giant HM2 sluts.
That's the tone, man. But that showcasing of like some different songwriting dynamics at the end, that's kind of what like ties it all together for me, just in terms of like, all right, it's definitely a worship and tribute album, but at the same time, there's some stuff that isn't necessarily that. Like, it's a little bit of them coming out. And, I mean, overall, I really dug this. Like, it's fast, it's furious. I mean, there's not a tremendous amount of variety. I mean, the variety is definitely like, oh, no, this sounds like Left Hand Path. And I was like, no, this one sounds like an ever-flowing stream. It's like, no, this one sounds like Dark Recollections. That's the variety on here for the most part, but I love all those albums. So that isn't a huge knock on here. So overall, I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. I like it. It's dirty. It's filthy. Honestly, in terms of HM2 stuff I have listened to that didn't come out in late early 90s this year, this is probably one of the most like on-the-nose ones in terms of capturing that Stockholm sound. Like, this 100% sounds like it came out in the 90s, and it is obviously pretty like transparent about it being retro. They got the right guy to mix it. They got the guy that, you know, practically helped invent it and just pretty much told the guys, hey, turn those knobs like all the way up and don't stop until like smoke is pouring out of those pedals. If you were a big fan of any of the bands we mentioned that are all from Stockholm, or just HM2 in general, check this out. This is honestly like just super cool in terms of just like a total retro sounding album.
I'm going to give this 3 stars. I'm amazed that they're as young as they are and they sound as dead on point to so many other bands that are well beyond them in age that have been doing it for a long time. Like, they've definitely nailed that sound. And while that's a plus, it's also a little bit of a negative because I've heard this. I've heard this many times, done from some of the greatest bands, I think, on the face of the planet. But what they did well. I would like to see what happens as they mature, especially with the title track being as different for the most part than the rest of the album. It sounds like them at this point, at the end. So like I feel like they're flirting a little bit more with their own sound and being less transparent about their influences as they get closer to the end. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to say than that, but much like Nick said too, if you like all the bands that we've referenced, and how could you not, you have to have heard them at some point. You're probably gonna like this. This is definitely like a good modern throwback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound modern whatsoever.
Right. And it doesn't sound modern at all. It definitely sounds like it was like, you know, buried under the studio or something, and they went to build a new room and they're like, oh hey, check this out. And then like Xorsist picked it up and they were like, oh, we could duplicate this. Like, that's pretty much what it sounds like, but it's still really fucking good. I would recommend checking it out.
And again, HM2, I mean, it's its own kind of subset of, not even just death metal. Like, I've heard that tone employed with hardcore bands, you know, crust bands, power violence bands. So there's like a lot of different flavors to it, but I don't know. In a way, it's kind of refreshing to hear like this just in its original disgusting state once again. It sounds freshly rotten, if that makes any sense.
And while that won't make sense to most people, to metal fans, you know, the true metal fans, that'll make a ton of sense.
You get us.
But most other people will be like, what? I feel like those are two opposing statements. They're not. That's what this is.
Yeah. No, I haven't had a stroke. No, I did not hit my head. I just kind of know a little bit about what I'm talking about, kind of, maybe.
Smidge.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsofmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel. But thrallsofmetal.com is where we have all of our merch. If you would like to get a Thralls Metal shirt, both new ones, which we have a new design that's absolutely awesome, and we have old ones that are discounted, that is where to get them. We also have hats there too, so there are options there, and yeah, if you want our stuff, that is where to go.
And while we're not promoting any shows right now, one thing that we will always promote is how much we appreciate you guys. Thank you to all of you who continue to follow us and you know, comment and who have become friends. You know, some of you guys have become actual friends, and we're appreciative of that. But it's because of you guys that we keep going and keep finding, you know, love for this. Not that we don't love it, because we obviously do. You see us all the goddamn time. But, you know, thank you guys. We really appreciate each and every one of you.
Yeah, you guys all rule, and one more big thank you from me, and we will catch you later.